Welcome to MH370, What Happened? Today I'd like to talk about the disappearance of Malaysian Airlines flight MH370 on the morning of the 8th of March 2014. Now, it's been 10 years since that happened, a decade, and you'll find on YouTube, in newspapers, online articles, discussions, on Twitter X and all sorts of social media, various stories, reports, official reports, etc., all about the disappearance of this flight. And the thing is, whether it was 2014 or 2024, large passenger airplanes such as the Boeing 777 just don't disappear. They've got so many systems on board, there's so many internal aircraft systems and so many external systems, external to the aircraft, that monitor the aircraft from the time before it even takes off to the time it lands. And airplanes don't just disappear. If they crash, they usually, a plane such as MH370 would disintegrate into 2 or 3 million pieces. It would leave a large debris field, and we've seen this numerous times with plane crashes around the world. Even if they crash into the ocean, they leave a debris field. If they crash on land, they leave a debris field. And as I said, there's so many systems and redundant backup systems, both on the plane and external to the planes, that they don't just disappear. And this is an incredible mystery. Now, let's just look at a lot of videos and a lot of presentations about this flight. They spend a lot of time debunking other theories. I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to waste my time doing that. If you want to find out all the other theories that are floating around, that people present that have been debunked, etc., I'm not going to do that. I'm going to talk about the disappearance, talk about what that actually means to disappear for a plane like this, a huge plane, which is almost the size of a jumbo jet with 239 people on board, for it to just disappear. I'm going to talk about the relationship between the disappearance and the cover-up, a cover-up. I'm going to talk about the evidence that's available to us about this flight. And then I'm going to briefly give a narrative, my narrative, that I relate and I base on that evidence that I've presented and the evidence that is available. And you'll find that the narrative I present is evidence-based, but it's also in large part very similar in many ways to the official narratives, but it does differ significantly also from those official narratives. Okay, so let's talk about the flight. It took off at 12:42 from Kuala Lumpur Airport, 8th of March 2014. It was heading to Beijing, and it was due to arrive there about 6:30. It never got there. It disappeared. Now, I came onto this subject only recently, about 4 or 5 months ago. And when I did that, I thought, well, I need to get all my facts. I need to find out what evidence is there. So I've constructed a timeline, a precise timeline to tell me exactly what is known to have happened, when it happened, etc. So basically, we know it took off at 12:40, 12:42. It was in the air, and about 40 minutes later, around 1:20 a.m. Malaysian time, it disappeared off the main radar control screens of the Malaysian control towers control centre, and even off the screens of the Vietnam control centre, which it was about to enter into. So it disappeared. And then we can follow through what happened for the rest of the flight. Before I get on to that, I'll talk about disappearance. The plane disappeared. And what does that mean? It means it was never found. We never found the bodies, never found the crash site, never found the black boxes. We never found anything much about it. There were a few bits of debris washed up in the Western Indian Ocean around Maldives, Diego Garcia, Reunion Island, Madagascar, the east coast of South Africa. So it's all over in that area. A little bit of debris, but not much. Less than 100 pieces, I think, which is way, way less than the 2 or 3 million pieces that could have been generated by a crash, either on land or in the ocean. So I want to talk about disappearance. The plane has disappeared. We've never found it. After 10 years, there's no evidence. There's been searches, the biggest Southern Indian Ocean search ever carried out, and nothing found. Now, that suggests if it's disappeared, it's either been, if someone disappears, for example, if a person disappears, it's either because they've brought their own disappearance about, or someone else has made them disappear. Someone else has been involved in that. Someone might have kidnapped them, someone might have murdered them and buried them somewhere. So it's either an internal disappearance or an external, the same with this flight. If this flight's disappeared, it's either been as a result of something that happened on the plane, someone on the plane, a hijacking, the murder-suicide by one of the pilots or whatever, and they've done something to make it disappear. Oh, it's been an external element that's come into play here. Now, even if it was generated or the incident was generated internally, the act of disappearing is still the same, whether it's internal or external, in that whoever is responsible or whatever is responsible has resulted in the disappearance of the plane. Now, in all cases, usually, in all cases, we could say that if a plane disappears, we eventually find it. We find it very quickly. We find that it's crashed somewhere and we locate it. It's very almost impossible for one of these large modern passenger liners to disappear. The fact that MH370 has disappeared suggests that there's a cover-up, that someone has not only been involved in its initial disappearance, but has been involved in the act of ensuring that it is not found. In other words, a cover-up. Because if you can make something disappear, but someone could then find it. So if you're involved in organising a disappearance, you're also involved in maintaining that disappearance, ensuring that the act, so for example, if you've murdered someone or you've taken something, you're then, if you want to cover it up, you're then involved in covering your tracks, ensuring that someone's not going to find it. And that can involve lying, setting up different scenarios, putting people off the track. In other words, suggesting that no, it possibly went over here rather than over there. In other words, getting people to look in the wrong place, setting up evidence that is not true evidence, but that it's misinformation. So there's no doubt that one of the most plausible explanations for the disappearance and what's happened over the last 10 years is that there's been an official or unofficial or somebody or some organisation has organised a cover-up. So I think if we can accept that part of the disappearance of MH370 involves a cover-up. And that's a quite significant thing. I think if we look at the official reports coming out of Australia, coming out of Malaysia, the two major reports and lots of assessments, they're not really talking about a cover-up. Though if you look deeply into the events of the day, you'll find a lot of people referring almost from the instant that almost from the day that it happened, of saying something's not right here, something's being hidden, we're not being told the truth. Even the former Prime Minister of Malaysia had said, there's something wrong here, there's some sort of cover-up going on. So that cover-up proposition has been there from the very earliest time of the disappearance. And I believe that's a fact, that it didn't just disappear and we can't find it. The reason we can't find it is because of this cover-up. And I believe the cover-up has been organised and carried on by America, the United States. Because in order to cover up such a big airplane, all the issues involved with that, it'd have to be a major country, a major organisation or something like that. So my belief is that America lies at the heart of the cover-up. And I believe that unless America tells the truth about what happened to MH370, we most likely will never find it. Because America is very good at covering up mysteries, at covering up incidents. We only have to look at the JFK assassination. And of course, there's a problem with cover-ups, especially by governments, because anyone who even suggests that is called a conspiracy theorist. They're lampooned, they're lambasted, they're just ignored, basically ignored, because such is the power of government and officialdom that people are naturally going to believe what they're told. But in 2024, I think more and more people are realising that we cannot rely on truth, openness and accountability on the part of government and organisations involved with important issues. So on the basis that there was a disappearance, on the basis that we've never found the plane, and it looks like we might never find the plane, I believe there's a cover-up. I believe the Americans are behind the cover-up. Okay, so that's just an introduction. Let's talk about what we know. Because ever since the disappearance of the plane, officials and ordinary people, members of the family, etc., have been trying to sort out what happened to the plane. What's the evidence? What do we think happened? Where is the plane? They've been trying to find it. And in order to find it, they've had to look at the evidence. They've had to compile evidence to give them at least a hint as to where to look. So we've got officials, we've got governments, we've got bureaucrats, we've got experts in aviation, in electronics, in data, all this sort of data, various experts, everyone coming up, looking into the issue of the flight, trying to come up with a possible scenario, hopefully leading to the discovery of the plane and the fate of the passengers, and we haven't got there. Nothing's been found. The fact that nothing's been found and the fact that we've focused our search in the Southern Indian Ocean clearly suggests to me, as it did almost from the time it happened, that they were looking in the wrong place. So what evidence do we have after a decade? We have various sets of evidence and we have various levels of evidence. I could note here that I mentioned 2 official reports on investigations into the flight, which are full of hundreds and hundreds of pages, full of evidence. But I've noted that within those reports, certain evidence is given weight and certain other evidence is not given much weight or is almost ignored. So I'm just going to follow my own path, looking at all the evidence, but also pulling out the evidence that I want to focus on. So we have various pieces of evidence. I could put them in various groups. We've got the evidence of the plane itself, the records generated by the plane, by its computers, by the computers that are feeding information into things called transponders, which then transmit information to satellites, which transmit information down to Earth-based stations and sites such as control towers, and to Boeing, and to the Malaysian Airlines, to Inmarsat, to various organisations and groups. So there's the information generated by the plane. I suppose related, the second big area of information, and that information generated from the plane was there from the takeoff to at 12:40 on Monday on the morning of the 8th of March 2014 to 9:34 Malaysian time later in the day, when we have evidence that's possibly when the flight ended, 9:34. So what happened between 12:40 and 9:34? What evidence have we got? As I said, we've got transmissions coming out of the plane, transponders, all sorts of, and all levels of data. We've got transmissions from out, we've got evidence from outside of the plane. Now, that evidence could be primarily radar. So we've got primary and secondary radar. The secondary radar is the evidence that's coming out of the plane, all that data that's being sent to satellites and then to ground stations. Other evidence is the radar, but the primary radar is that normal civilian and military radar, that traditional radar that you'll see a circular screen, something going around, there'll be a blip, and all of a sudden that blip will represent the plane. So that radar coverage, and those radar towers usually only have a 200-kilometre diameter spread. So primary radar, which is that ground-based radar, has a limited spread. Secondary radar, which is that internally generated on the plane kind of radar, or from satellite pings, etc., that covers the whole planet. So no matter where the plane is, it can be found using the secondary radar, and primary radar is very much limited to proximity to the actual radar stations. So we've got that location data. Now, the secondary data might be computer generated. It might be a bundle of information that has GPS data saying precisely where the plane is at any point in time. That'll be sent up to a satellite and then down to a ground station and maybe to the control tower at Ho Chi Minh Airport or Kuala Lumpur Airport. And the control tower operators will look on their screen, and that data will tell them this is MH370 and this is precisely where it is. The primary radar data will be a blip on the screen that won't tell them which plane it is. It might give them information about the speed, it might give them information about the height, but it's less of an information package. So we had that secondary data going all the way through from the beginning of the flight to the end of the flight. We had the primary data, the ground-based data from the civilian towers, civilian radar, and also from the military radar. We had that going to about, I think it was about 2:22 in the morning, which is so 12:30, 1:32, 2:30, which is nearly 2 hours later. 1 hour and about 40 minutes after the plane had taken off. So the plane takes off at 12:40, 40 minutes later, it disappears off a lot of those control tower screens. It travels for another hour when it disappears off the civilian and military radar screens. So that's one group of data we've got about from the radar, secondary and primary, and transponders and some of that other information being emitted. We've also got eyewitness data, and this is very important. This is one area that's often been neglected. in the official reports or hasn't been given much weight. So we've had visualization of the plate takeoff of the plane as it headed northeast from Kuala Lumpur towards Beijing. Then we know that 40 minutes in, something happened and the pilots, it turned around and headed back southwest towards Penang in Malaysia. Now, from the point of the turnaround, I should just point out, okay, so it turns around, heads to Penang. That all that previous radar data is telling us it's turned around, headed to Penang. As it's reached the coast on the eastern side of Malaysia, Penang, it's turned around and headed up the, roughly northwesterly direction through the Strait of Malacca towards the Nicobar Islands and the northern extremity of the island of Sumatra. So it's headed up over water. And during that period, from about 40 minutes in to about an hour and 40 minutes in, it's been observed. So it's been observed in the South China Sea by fishermen. It was observed by a man on an oil rig. And then when it passed over Penang, there was a ping from the co-pilot's phone over a Penang telecom tower. And then around 2:22, it was observed as it approached the Nicobar and other islands when it was starting to disappear. Well, that was that visual aspect of it, the Nicobar and peak of Sumatra was shortly after it had disappeared off military radar, apparently, around 2:22. So we have a whole series of visual sightings by people on the ground. Now they're enhanced because of the fact that at various points the plane was flying very low. So I think the normal altitude for the cruising altitude for the plane was around about 35,000 feet. And I'll just double check that. It's around 35,000 feet. Yes. And at some stages, it's gone up to a height, after it's turned around, it's gone up to a height of over 43,000 feet, and it's come down to a low height of a couple of thousand feet, say 4,000 or 5,000 feet. And so it's gone up and down, and it's weaved around a little bit, and as it was going along. So there's been various sightings. There were sightings by fishermen, people on the east coast of Malaysia and in the South China Sea. And one of those sightings was someone who was on an oil rig in the South China Sea, and he saw the plane on fire. He saw a plane on fire, which we're assuming is MH370. He saw a plane on fire. Okay. The plane was later seen, as I said, as it came out of the Straits of Malacca towards Nicobar and started to head west, and it was seen by a person on a boat around about 2:22 a.m. in the morning. And once again, it was surrounded by this orange glow. Now, the orange glow, she said it was like a halogen light. Now, that orange glow was the vapours coming out of as the result of the fire extinguishers on board, which were fighting a fire. So we've got evidence that there was a fire on board the plane. And then we've got the other big group of visual sightings was at the Maldives Islands around about 9:15 Malaysian time or 6:15 Maldives time in the morning. Once again, the plane was flowing low, it did a bit of circling, came around various parts, and then headed off in a southerly direction, southwesterly direction. So we've got those visual sightings, which in many ways verify the radar sighting, verify the other data transmissions coming out of the plane sightings. At least until that point around 2:22, following the lady in the boat seeing it, where it basically disappears from radar. That's the last visual sighting for that time being. 2:22, it's not then seen until for another 6 or 7 hours later. Now, the next set of data we have is the MSAT data, which is a satellite that was able to ping one of the systems in the plane, and that happened approximately every hour, right through to about 9:15. Sorry, 8:15 or so. Now, that data has been interpreted twice. Firstly, it was interpreted by the IMSAT people. It was made available a week or so after the plane disappeared. And there was about 8 instances of data it had over that time period that could be used to, through quite a complex mathematical method, it could be used to not very precisely suggest the location of the plane. The problem with the IMSAT data was that it was a single point of information. Now, in order to precisely locate something, you need to triangulate, have 3 points of information, and those 3 points will then cross over and give you a precise point if you haven't got GPS, etc. So they'd have this one piece of data which would give them a ring on the surface of the Earth for a possible location of the plane. Because the satellite was located approximately above the Maldives in the northwestern section of the Indian Ocean. And it was basically in the geostationary orbit. It didn't move much, it moved a little. So it would ping the airplane and go, okay, to get something back, and you could work out, okay, well, from the time of the ping, the ping was sent out to the plane and it returned, there'd be a period of time, and from that time you could work out what was the distance that the plane was away from the satellite. Okay, so this is kind of rather imprecise, but they're able to, as a result of that, they'll have a distance, but that just says, okay, it can be anywhere within a circle on the Earth below the satellite. And that circle might have gone into Malaysia, it might have gone west into Africa, might have gone north into India, and Vietnam and Asia, and it might have gone south down towards Antarctica. So you've got this big ring, and then there were basically 7 rings that were able to be developed based on an interpretation of the Inmarsat data that had never been carried out before. So even at the time that was released, there was some equivocation as to whether this was accurate and reliable data. But nevertheless, as soon as that was information was made available, the authorities jumped on it and said, okay, the plane's headed south towards the southern Indian Ocean and has crashed somewhere off the Australian coast west of Perth. And that's been the official line ever since. There's been searches there, nothing's ever been found. There was no debris field, nothing. Nothing was found in the southern Indian Ocean, which would support the interpretation of the Inmarsat data that it was sent that way. But there's another interpretation of the Inmarsat data that was carried out very soon after the data was made available. And that was by an engineer in Australia, South Australia, who since from 2014 through to 2022 has been interpreting that data and has shown through his interpretation of that Inmarsat data that the plane headed west towards the Maldives. It still generated 6 or 7 rings. It still had those circles, but he was able to develop a scenario, a legitimate scenario supported by a 170-page document that he presented to the Malaysian authorities, he presented to the Australian authorities. He publicly presented all this data, and there was no real, there hasn't been any official, as far as I'm aware, denigration or public criticism or suggestion that his information was wrong. It just has not been talked about. It has not been promoted. It has not been adopted and not been followed up. Which is also, I mentioned earlier about cover-ups. If you're running a cover-up, you're going to do everything you can to ensure that people don't look in the right direction. If there's evidence in that direction, you're going to either try to get to ignore it or try to debunk it or try to tell people to focus on some other part of that information. So I think part of the cover-up has been to ignore basically ignore this second interpretation of the Inmarsat evidence. So I believe that second interpretation. I don't believe the first one. One of the reasons I don't believe in the first one's correct in the fact that it's been proven over a decade not to be a fact. They didn't find the plane. They didn't find any evidence to suggest that the plane actually ended up in the southern Indian Ocean like that. So we have that, and that Inmarsat data tells us, according to that second interpretation, that the plane went west and towards the Maldives. Final bit of information we have, final bit of data, is the hydroponics. So around the world, there's a whole heap of hydroponic sounding device stations that have been set up by the United Nations as part of the anti-nuclear treaty to monitor underground and undersea atomic explosions, etc. And so there's arrays of hydrophones in places such as off Perth. Usually be an array of 3 independently powered hydrophones. So if one goes down, the others keep. There's a hydrophone station at Diego Garcia, which is an island in the middle of the Indian Ocean near the Maldives, and it's basically a super high secret American military base where a lot of its bombers and aircraft are stationed. There's underground facilities. There's a lot of its aircraft carriers and ships of the fleet go there, etc. But it's very secret. It has a 3-kilometre or greater exclusion zone around it, etc., etc. But once again, if the Americans are behind the cover-up, one of the scenarios is that they'd attempt to get the plane to Diego Garcia, where they could then either land it at the airbase or land it in the ocean near there and deal with it then, perhaps. But I'll talk about some of that later. So the evidence from those hydrophones is that at 9:34 that morning, something hit the water. There was an impact in the area around the Maldives, or in the area around Diego Garcia, in the Indian Ocean. So we have a starting point, we have an ending. And if we follow the data that I want to follow, then I think we should. The radar evidence, the Inmarsat evidence, the personal people seeing the plane evidence. Oh, the other bit of evidence I didn't mention was the debris. So a year or so later, months later, debris started to appear in islands off the west coast, off the western part of the Indian Ocean. Now, a lot of people said, oh, yeah, that's fine. That's all the debris that's come from the landing in the southern Indian Ocean near Australia. It's all been, the currents have sent it out towards the coast of Africa. Well, that doesn't stack up. There's no debris field being found where they've looked close to Australia. There's no debris on the shores of Australia. You can go to Wikipedia and look at Indian Ocean currents, and it's saying the first thing it says is that one of the surface ocean current is not necessarily going towards the west, it's going towards the north and the east, towards Australia and up the Australian coast. So the fact that all of the debris there's only about 25, 30 pieces, less than 100, has been found in the far west, would suggest that the plane entered the water or crashed or whatever close to those sites. The Flaperon, for example, that was found near Reunion Island, which is near the Maldives and Diego Garcia. Now, if that's been shown to come from the plane, that strongly indicates that the plane did a belly or landing in the ocean somewhere near those islands in western part of the Indian Ocean. Maybe it was off the coast of Diego Garcia. Maybe it was somewhere near the Maldives. If it was off the coast of Diego Garcia, the Americans would have been able to, and even if it broke up during that landing, the Americans would have been able to relatively quickly secure the plane, perhaps use their various shipping, etc., and bring it on land, store it in some of its underground storage facilities, clean up most of the debris field out of sight of the rest of the world, basically, because there's no one around Diego Garcia and that area of the Indian Ocean, apart from the Americans. And you know, that's a very plausible scenario to suggest that it crashed in the South China Sea and it was cleaned up before anyone found any of the debris, or in the southern Indian Ocean in Australia where no debris was ever found. Just tells me that that's not where it ended up. And if we're assuming that debris is from MH370, if it's not, the plane might have been landed at Diego Garcia and then hidden. So there we have the evidence. There's one other section of evidence that I didn't talk about, and that's to do with satellite evidence. Now, at the point around 222, when it was in the Straits of Malacca and it was starting to disappear from the Malaysian military and the Thai military and Indonesian military radar and from the normal civilian radar, there was 2 pieces of video footage released by an American military whistleblower who subsequently served 6 years in jail for releasing that information. The first piece of information was satellite video footage of the plane as it made a kind of turn and then was subject to a disappearance. This footage has been shown to be real. We know from the fact that US spy satellites are able to get incredible detail. For example, Prime Minister Trump released a satellite photograph of a location in the Middle East that was part of one of the actions by the American military over there. And it revealed the depth of the ability of how the American satellites were able to get detail from thousands of feet up in the air the numerous satellites that they have covering the Earth. Now, the Americans and other countries, China, Russia, etc., have the whole planet basically covered with satellite monitors that monitor both commercial and secret and private communications. They monitor the internet. They monitor all sorts of things. So there's complete coverage, and that's one of the reasons, once again, why planes like MH370 don't just disappear. They're on someone's radar, they're on someone's screen, they're being monitored 24/7, no matter what happens to them. I mean, even Boeing monitors the engines. These major Airbus monitors engines, so that if they know straight away, perhaps even before the pilots, how the engines are going, what's happening on the plane. So you have all this information, all this public information, and then you also have this not so public information, this secret information, this information that Americans might classify, or Russia or China or whoever, or Malaysia or Australia might classify as secret. Americans also have a classification called above top secret, which they don't even tell their president or their parliamentarians, Congress people about. So, as I said, there's this video footage of the plane from above, from the satellite, looking down onto it. And you can see smoke coming out from the back. And there's also a second video of a drone that intercepted MH370. And once again, that shows a lot of the heat on the plane. It shows the heat, perhaps fire coming out from the base of the plane through the air conditioning ducts, etc. But also it shows smoke coming out from the back of the plane as well. So we know that around that time, 2:20, an hour and 40 minutes in, the fires on board were still happening. And those fires are very likely to be the cargo of lithium-ion batteries that had most likely started a fire and explosion at that around that 40-minute mark, when the pilots decided they needed to turn around and try to land as quickly as possible. So for over an hour after that, there's still fires on board, and that's why around that 2:20 mark, when the lady, that's about the time that lady on the boat saw the plane. That's about the time that she saw that it had an orange glow around it. That's about the time that the drone intercepted. That's about the time that we have this clip of the plane from the satellite, which is only a clip, suggesting that there might have been a more extensive satellite video of exactly what happened to the plane from the time that it was first, as I think happened, was first intercepted by the Americans and followed to the time that it's the end of the flight, around 9:34. So we have all this evidence, but evidence is not a story, it's not a narrative, because the evidence alone doesn't tell us doesn't necessarily explain what was going on. Now, with all that evidence I've presented, I could come up with many, many, many different stories, narratives, scenarios about what I think happened. And I'll just quickly give you the one that I think happened. Now, there's elements of this that you'll say, oh, no, it's viral, it's conspiracy theories, it's wacko stuff. But all of it is based on those elements of evidence that I presented to you, and that you can go and you can find support for that on my blog, on all those other sites, all those others. Because as I said, the official narratives, they're providing a narrative, the official reports are providing a narrative based on their picking and choosing various elements of evidence, and then interpreting all those elements of evidence and then bringing that all together to form a kind of a story. Now, my narrative is going to be half of what the official narrative is, but from that 222 point, when the official narrative says that no, it entered the Indian Ocean and went south towards Antarctica, that's where I stop. That's where I go, nah, that's wrong. I'm saying it went west towards the Maldives and Diego Garcia. So basically, in summary, my interpretation of what happened, what was the path of MH370 is this: took off from Kuala Lumpur at 12:42 on the morning of the 8th of March 2014, headed off towards Beijing. 40 minutes in, there was a fire on board, was noted. The lithium-ion batteries began to catch fire. There would have been explosions associated with that. When they catch fire, they emit toxic fumes of deep, dark, dense smoke. It was in the front cargo bay, so that would have impacted upon the cockpit. The pilots immediately took action. The captain would have turned the plane around, headed towards Penang, which is his home ground, the area he knew best. Perhaps he put it on autopilot while they were trying to work through the process of isolating the fire, working out where the fire has come from, trying to put it out, turning all the buses off, turning all the electrical systems off, and slowly turning them back on in case it was just merely electrical fire. Perhaps even taking it up to a high level, such as above 43,000 feet, in order to starve the fire of oxygen. So all of this might have been going on, but what also might have happened very quickly and at the same time as this 40-minute mark after the turnaround is everyone on board died from the asphyxiation, from the connected with, there might have been a rupture of the plane somewhere, the fuselage somewhere as part of the fire and explosion. The toxic fumes might have killed everyone. The pilots had masks in there to help with that. Maybe one or both of them died as part of that. So plane turns around, it disappears. I think almost immediately there would have been alarms raised. We're told that alarm wasn't raised for 10, 15, 20 minutes, but on the part of the ground controllers from Malaysia end and Vietnam end. But we're not told about what other action was taken. We're told that Malaysians Air Force didn't bother to intercept the plane because they knew it was theirs and they knew it wasn't an enemy. What I think happened is the Americans knew pretty quickly that there was something wrong. They intercepted the plane. There was AWACS around. That's big planes with huge telecommunications antennas and other equipment on board. They might have seen jets up. I think the lights on the cabin were on, and they might have been able to see that the pilots, by the time they got there, as it was coming back, they might have been able to see that the pilots were dead. And what the Americans then did is took control of the plane. Now, ever since 9/11, in a major speech by President Bush, Boeing and other major air manufacturers have put in place an uninterruptible autopilot system where an external body, an external plane that can take control of the plane and fly it. So that if, for example, hijackers take over the plane and decide they want to fly it into a population centre, the military can come along and take control of them, take control of the plane and steer it away from those population areas. And this is exactly what I think happened. America took control of the plane once it passed over Penang. They then turned it around up the Straits of Malacca and headed it out to safety away from the island of Sumatra, where there's a a very large population, so they kept it over the water, headed it out west, I would suggest towards Diego Garcia, where they knew they could then either land it normally, or if it was damaged, if, as I said, the fire was in the hole, there might have been a lot of damage to the electrical systems as a result of that fire. They mightn't have been able to lower the landing gear, so they might have had been forced to just ditch the plane. But they had control. So the Americans had control from probably while it was still in the South China Sea and as it was coming across the border between Malaysia and Thailand. So that by the time it gets to the northern part of the Strait of Malacca and near the northern part of the island of Sumatra, around 2:22, Americans have remote control of the plane. There's then this intercept by these three circular orbs, and the plane seems to disappear for a time being. And then it reappears, and the Inmarsat data pings continue to happen right through till 8:15 the next morning. We have the interpretation of that data, which is telling us that it's going west. It's going in a rather zigzag line, but it's going west. And perhaps what the Americans were doing, they'd have control of the plane, but they were just trying to control it and fly it so it used up as much of its fuel, so that when they landed it, if it was a crash landing, it wouldn't necessarily explode if it was to crash early with a full contingent of fuel on board. So that's basically my scenario. That then they fly to the west. They have control of it. When they get to the Maldive Islands, they turn the direction down towards. They circle around there once or twice, I think. It's seen by 15 or more people that morning, and then it goes southwest towards Diego Garcia. And it's my view. And I seem to have had that view way back in 2014 when I first read about this, and when even that Diego Garcia theory was raised even then. I seemed, in my mind, I had this kind of vision that I could see the plane had landed or crashed or whatever, and all the people were still sitting in their seats. But that was all I could see. That was all I felt. So that's what I think has happened. It's then ended up where they've ditched it in the ocean, in the sea, off Diego Garcia, and they've then gone about hiding it. They might have done that in order to see whether there's anyone still alive on board. People said, oh yeah, they would have shot it out of the sky. I don't think that happened, because to shoot a passenger plane out of the sky like that, knowingly killing hundreds of people on board, even though the Americans had done that previously to an Iranian flight, I think. Especially when there was Chinese, there was Australians, there was Americans, there was a whole swathe of different nationalities on board. I don't think that was a possibility, because it would have had major ramifications. Nevertheless, my theory is, my belief is that if you take all this evidence on board, it ditched in the water. As it ditched in the water, the flaperon came off some other parts. Perhaps the plane broke up a little bit, and other bits and pieces of the plane ended up in the water, but not a substantive part, because there was not a lot of debris that floated around. Now, if it was only broken up in a couple of parts, the Americans might have been able to salvage it very quickly and clean it up, so that those bits of debris that have been found in the vicinity of that Diego Garcia Maldives Islands area, that explains why we have what we have, why we have some debris in those locations, why we have none over in Australia or in the Southern Indian Ocean. And that once they got hold of that, the Americans have just gone mute on it. They didn't. You'll notice in all the books and stories, the Americans are mute, basically. They've either said, no, we don't know, no, we have no idea, but they haven't provided any evidence of the radar, the hydrophone evidence from Diego Garcia, the 3 sets of hydrophones that were recording any impact in the ocean, were obtained around 2016 by a university in England. And all the data was there apart from a 25-minute period from about 9:15 to 9:45, which is the exact point at which the plane hit the water. Now, those files have been doctored with, and they've been doctored by the Americans, who were responsible for that hydroponic data. So it was a clear case of part of a cover-up. Clear case. So the cover-up by America is supported by that, is supported by the release of those drone video and satellite video by the American military Lieutenant Commander Liam, who was then given a 6-year jail sentence for doing that, by the lack of evidence provided by the Americans in regard to satellites, in regards to radar and satellite data, any official support. So that's basically where I sit. I believe the Americans have the plane in a bunker, perhaps somewhere on Diego Garcia. The bodies, who knows what's happened there. And because of the secrecy surrounding the ability to intercept planes, the ability to monitor the planes with such accuracy from satellites, from spy satellites, the ability to use those 3 orbs they did to actually make the plane disappear for a period and then reappear. All of those elements of the convoluted action by the Malaysian authorities, saying one thing and then saying, no, that's not true, and another thing, all this points to the cover-up and points to the fact that unless the Americans come tell the truth about what happened, because they know exactly what happened, there's no doubt about that in my mind, unless the Americans come tell the truth, we will never know what happened to MH370. Thank you.